I just made them up, so I don't think I shared it with you.
You shared it.
I did. I think, is that the top of the page?
No, it's at the bottom of topic 2, limits analytically, in the notes section.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So again, you should be working on these two problems. I always feel like, especially when I can't see what you're doing in front of me, that sometimes I rush, so I don't want to really rush this. What you want to be able to do is, again, set up the limit first. I might remind you, just as you're getting started, say if you're looking at the first one with f of x, when you see f of 8 plus h, you're going to replace the x with 8 plus h in order to create your limit. So that is kind of the first step, and also in some ways the first challenge is just setting it up. I want to give you some time to try these. Again, all we're doing today is just these two questions. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about your quiz. And honestly, the rest of the week, class is going to be like you log in, we'll have like a short warm up, and then you'll have the rest of the time to work and ask questions. And I can also open up some of the small groups if you want to work with your friends in the class. But go ahead and see what you can do with those two questions for me. If you see any writing on the board, it's not me teaching yet, so don't think you're muted or anything. It's just me trying to write some stuff before getting started. And don't hesitate to unmute your mic if you want to ask any questions.
Is it not 16 plus 2h?
It definitely is, Taylor. Thanks.
You're welcome.
That would have been bad. And so when you're setting up limits, once you get it set up, and we will talk about setting it up once I start going over it, remember, you can always do direct substitution. If you get just a number, that's your answer. If you get a number over 0, your answer will be D and E. If you get 0 over 0, then that's when you have to do some other stuff. So there's factor and cancel, there's rationalize, there's just simplifying, especially if you have like fractions within a fraction. But the goal is that eventually something should cancel out and you can find that limit. For this warm-up, I did choose what I think is probably the harder types of limits for students to figure out. And those are the ones that I call the plus H problems. Because you do have to set up the limit first. So I'm going to talk about the f of x one. I will say some common mistakes I see, just so you can be aware of what a common mistake is. And I know it's common because it shows up almost every year on my quizzes or tests, is that when people want to find, this is going to be the wrong answer, I'm writing it in red. If people want to find f of h plus x, they'll just kind of bring down the function with like the number plugged in for x and just stick an h added on the end. That is not what you want to do. You want to make sure you're plugging it in and kind of following the algebra of the problem. So if I'm going to create my limit for this one, my function is f of x, which is equal to 2x. So when I am doing the f of 8 plus h, that tells me whenever I see an x, I'm instead replacing it with the x plus h, minus when I see just f of 8, we know what that means. F of 8 just tells you to plug in 8 for x. I like setting up those off to the side. Some people can just write the limit down all at once. But if I'm setting this up, I'm going to talk about the f of 8 plus h first. So what I have highlighted in yellow, f of 8 plus h, tells you whenever you see an x, has been replaced with 8 plus h. So instead of saying the square root of 2 times x, I have the square root of 2 times 8 plus h. And then just get rid of some of those parentheses because that's a lot going on right there with the square root and the parentheses. Distribute. Don't do what I did the first time. Make sure you distribute correctly. So we end up with the square root of 16 plus 2h. F of 8 is a little bit easier because we just know that means plug in 8 for x. So we end up with the square root of 2 times 8, the square root of 16, which is just 4. And then I need to go ahead and put that into my limit. So the limit tells me that this is all over h as h goes to 0. And then it tells you to do what happened when you plugged in the 8 plus h, and you're going to subtract that and then put down what you have for the f of 8. So I end up with this as my limit. Before we start solving it, does anyone have any questions or things that I can go back and clarify on how I set up my limit? Because again, if you can't set up the limit, then you're not going to be able to solve it anyways.
Hey, I got a question.
Yes.
So something I've noticed you do a lot is you put the LIM and then H to 0. And is there a reason why you do that? Is that just so that you know it's a limit?
Good question. So that is actually like you have to. So you cannot drop off writing the LIM and then X or H and what it's approaching until you actually take the limit. And that's something that, especially as we start getting to longer and longer problems, that I'll emphasize. Yes, it's really annoying to write it over and over again, but it's kind of like, how can I describe it? On the AP exam, the short answer is, if you don't write that on the AP exam before you actually take the limit, you may not receive full credit because College Board will consider that to be a linkage error in math. Another way to put it is like that is an actual mathematical operation. So it kind of be like saying the square root of x without putting the square root sign around the x. So like we need that limit there until I plug in this case, 0 for h. Once I plug in 0 for h, though, then you'll notice I drop it off. So I am glad you kind of brought that up.
Yeah. So if we end up missing that, let's say on our homework or our notes,
So on the homework, I won't care, but on the quiz or the test, I do expect to see proper notation.
okay, so those will be points off if we don't have notation.
Yes, you do need to write the LIM part until your final answer.
All right, cool.
And that's only because I have to grade it that way because that's how the AP exam will grade it. So looking at this, you could plug in H for 0, but we do see we end up with 0 over 0. So what method are we going to use to simplify this one?
Rationalization.
Rationalize. So big hint, we see the square root, so we're going to rationalize. The square root's in the numerator, but that doesn't mean we can't rationalize it. So make sure you multiply on the top and the bottom. I sometimes see students rushing and they just forget to also multiply by it on the bottom. And then we want to simplify it. So some shortcuts, remember, you don't have to FOIL together the part of the fraction that did not originally have the square root. So when I go to simplify this, so again, I am writing that LIM part because I haven't taken the limit yet. That denominator is going to be h times the square root of 16 plus 2h plus 4. The numerator, so the square root of 16 plus 2h times the square root of 16 plus 2h is just 16 plus 2h. The outer and inner terms are going to cancel because we have like the minus 4 times the square root and then the positive 4 times the square root. That's the whole point of multiplying by the conjugate. And then minus 4 times positive 4 gives me negative 16. I will say for these plus h problems, if you do it correctly, things will always cancel out. You will never, ever have a case where things do not cancel out. So if I'm looking at this one, I do notice the 16s cancel out. And then most of you can already see this part without me writing it down, but I'm going to for the sake of us being able to see it. So that's what I have now. Again, you could plug in 0 for h, but we're still getting 0 over 0, and that's because those h's need to cancel out. Now we can plug in 0. So at this point, I can go ahead and drop the LIM part because I am taking the limit now. We just have a 2 in the numerator, and the denominator we have the square root of 16. 2 times 0 is 0 plus 4. Remember, if you don't feel like simplifying, you can leave your answer like that. I'm fine with that. That earns full credit. If you simplify it, you just need to make sure you simplify it correctly. Square root of 16 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. So you can either write your answer as 2/8 or reduce that to 1/4. Any questions or concerns for that one?
Where did the 2h go?
The h's cancel and just left the 2. And then this 2h in the square root, remember we're plugging in 0 for h. So 2 times 0 is 0.
Okay, so we plug in 0 there. Okay.
Yes, and once I plug in 0 for h, that's when I stopped writing the LIM part.
Okay.
All right. So that second one, do you all want me to go ahead and go over it or give you some time to look over it or fix it?
Give us some time, please.
Okay, so I'm not going to change the slide. Maybe that will help jog your memory on how to do it. Try that second one. Again, you want to set up what g of x plus h is, minus what g of x is, and then find the limit. Not starting it quite yet, but if you want to check what your limit expression should look like, I did go ahead and change the slide before you work it out completely and possibly have something wrong. Got maybe a few more minutes to finish it. I will say this one, your final answer will not be D and E. So you should get an actual number if you do it correctly. So setting this one up, we have g of x is 1 over x. So this first part, when I want to find g of x plus h, that tells me every time I see an x, instead of writing x, I am going to write x plus h first instead of it. So g of x plus h is going to be 1 over x plus h. Notice that is not saying 1 over x and then plus h out to the side. That's going to be 1 over the x plus h. G of x is just the function 1 over x. So the limit, when I write that out, I have 1 over x plus h minus 1 over x all over h, and we're taking this limit as h goes to 0. Questions on how I set that one up?
No.
All right, so solving it, plug in 0 for h, and we end up with like 1 over x minus 1 over x, which is 0, all over 0. So when I look at this one, the issue really is that fraction within a fraction, and I do recommend doing kind of a shortcut where you can multiply both the numerator and the denominator of what that common denominator is of the extra fractions. So looking at those fractions in the numerator, you have x and x plus h. So I'm going to multiply it by x times x plus h, but make sure what you do in the numerator, you also do in the denominator. And then you want to distribute and simplify as necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and bring down what I have. The denominator I'm going to leave separated because, again, I'm hoping that things cancel out. And then in the numerator, we're going to simplify this. I'm going to try to do it, color code it, and see how well it works. So first step is I'm going to distribute the common denominator of x times x plus h to that first fraction. So if I have 1 over x plus h times that common denominator, what's going to be left over after you cancel out?
X.
Just the x, correct. And then I have minus, and I want to do the same thing. I have that common denominator, and that's now going to distribute to 1 over x. Well, when I distribute that common denominator to the 1 over x, what's left over this time? The x plus h. Notice I did put that in parentheses because I am subtracting it. So we would want to simplify it. And so when I go to simplify it, I'm going to go ahead and distribute that negative across. So I have the limit as h goes to 0 of x minus h of hx times x plus h. Again, for all these plus h problems, things will cancel out always if you do it correctly. Those x's cancel. So we have the limit as h goes to 0 of negative h over hx times x plus h. Now the h's cancel. When I say the h's cancel, what we're left over with is a -1 technically. And so now we can go ahead and plug in the limit. So I'm plugging in 0 for h. So I have a -1 left over on top. And then I have x times x plus 0 to show you it kind of clearly, which is just going to give you -1 over x squared. That is a number, like we are assuming that x is a number. So we do see that the limit to this is a -1 over x squared. kind of a unique one, but we do just want to also be certain that since h was going to 0, we did plug in the 0 for the h variable and not the x variable. So I'll zoom out so you can see that full problem. Any questions or things I should clarify about that?
So you can get an
No, that's the
expression
correct
for
answer.
like your
That's
final
my-
answer.
Yes, and the reason why we got an expression, if I were to go back and compare these two examples, notice how they both have plus h in them. The first one we got an actual number because there was like the 8 plus h. So basically the x value is also being replaced with a number. In this one we got an expression, which we will learn in Unit 2 what that actually represents. Short answer is called the derivative, but we'll learn more about where it comes from. But yes, you can get an expression for your limit, particularly for, I'm trying to think if there's any other cases. No, for you, you're pretty much only going to get an expression for a limit if it's a plus h problem, and it's something like x plus h, not just a number plus h.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're at limit is h to 0 and it says x minus in parentheses x plus h, are we supposed to cancel out the h? Why can't we cancel out the x value during that stage?
Good question. You're talking about, is it where I had the black numbers? That stuff?
It's like it's red, green, and black. It's like in the middle.
Okay, I see it. So good question. So you're talking about, I'm going to highlight it in blue, this step right here.
Yes, that one.
So in that step, I'm glad you brought that up. So that would be what I consider to be bad algebra. So remember in math, we cannot ever cancel across a plus or a minus sign. So like if I have something, if I were just to simplify this, in math, if you have something like x plus 2 over x, this is going to be wrong, but this is canceling that to give an x out to give you a 2 is bad algebra. And for the students who had me last year know that I actually have a stamp that would show up on any quizzes or tests where if you use bad algebra, you would get that stamp. Can't really use it virtually, but in math, we cannot ever cancel across a plus or a minus sign. That's why when I go back to the problem, and really any of these problems, I only cancel when I have factors or when I've gotten rid of like the plus or the minus sign between terms. So like when I show my steps, I canceled out the x's first in the numerator, and then I could cancel out the h's because I no longer had things being added or subtracted. I just had like a factor. But yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up so I can emphasize that. Never, ever, ever cancel across plus or minus signs.
So you can cancel across multiplication, right?
Yeah, so like if you have x times x plus 2 over x, that is allowed. But canceling an x plus 2 over x and those x's out is not allowed. Anything else, guys? All right, so I am going to show you kind of this. I don't know how well you can see that, so I'm going to kind of zoom in. So the homework you should be working on right now, I'm not assigning any more homework this week. You have homework 1, you have homework 2, and homework 3. Remember the incentive I have for homework. It is going in the grade book. It doesn't count for you or against you, but if your homework percentage is 100%, I will replace your quiz grade with your test grade. Which hopefully you do well in your quiz, but just in case, that is the incentive that I have. I did want to remind you that your quiz is on Friday. There is a list of topics that will be on your quiz. I will send this out as well and post it in Teams, so don't feel like you have to copy that down. I'll post it as an announcement in the general tab. But just like what is a limit, basically, finding limits graphically, finding the limits when I give you a graph, sketching a graph given the limit information, and then 1 and 2-sided limits. Basically, all of this kind of stuff is you reviewing homework number 1, and then also limits analytically. I list a whole bunch there, but basically if you do homeworks number 2 and homeworks number 3, that's getting you to review limits analytically. So everything from direct substitution to making sure we know how to evaluate trig and the unit circle and common algebra skills and things like that. Last thing I'll kind of say is if you're worried about your quiz and you want some more things to study, obviously I think the homework is the best way to study. I write the quizzes and tests while looking at the homework. There will be some overlap, not the exact same questions, but if you do your homework and understand it, you should do well on your quiz. You know, like on homework 2, I only assigned the even problems. I did post the answer key to have the odd ones as well, so you can go back and do some extra problems. Also, if you go to the general channel and teams and go back to the answer keys, you'll see an archive of some old quizzes. And after I said that, I need to double check that I actually put those there. But that will give you a chance to go back and see some old quizzes. And actually I said that, and I don't think I actually updated those yet, but they will be there before tomorrow. Yes, Mitchell.
Yeah, so I'm having a little bit of trouble getting into the answer key section. It's letting me click on the file, but it's not actually loading. I don't know if anyone else is having that problem.
Okay. We can troubleshoot that later on.
Are you able to put that in the answer key in the OneNote? Can you do that?
I'm not. I'm gonna leave it in Teams.
Okay.
So at this point I am going to, so it's 1:43. So you know you have about 10 minutes left of class. Tomorrow it's just gonna be like you show up, warm up, and then you'll have time to work. So if you're good to go, you can go ahead and log out. I'll be here if you want to ask questions, but then you can also meet with me kind of more one-on-one if you want to come during office hours at all. Just send me a message on Remind. If you're still thinking about dropping from calculus to stats or switching your schedule around, we can definitely have that conversation as well. If you think calculus is going to be a little bit out of reach, or you just don't want to put forth the effort, or you just think stats will be a better course for you. Whatever the reason is fine. But if you're good to go, you can go ahead and sign out. I won't keep you, but definitely hang back if you want to ask any questions.